I need to go to the bathroom.
Okay, you go to the bathroom.
Check. Test.
Good evening. Just doing a microphone check. Can you hear me out there? Thank you.
Hey, Jen, you tell me when you want us to start, okay?
Hey, Jesse, can you bring Aaron in as a panelist, please?
You got it.
Jesse, could you bring in John Gores as well, please?
You got it.
Thank you, sir.
Jen, are we ready?
I think everyone's here.
Okay. So the purpose of this meeting is to have a discussion about,
Kim, let me call. Yep, I'll just go through that process really quickly. Okay, so it is 4:32 p.m. on February 22nd, 2022. This is a Tuesday special board meeting for the Monroe School District. Present are all 5 directors, Director Campbell, Director Whitfield, Director Barnes, and Director Johnson, and Acting Superintendent Kim Whitworth, Executive Staff, as well as Corey Plager and John Gores, and members of the community. I want to thank and welcome everyone to today's meeting. Members of the public can log into the special board meeting using the Zoom link on the board docs website. Can I please have everyone rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Have a seat. Okay, and then going on to agenda item 1.04, review of agenda, and 1.05, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve the agenda dated February 22nd, 2020?
(2022), Jen.
2022. Is there a motion that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve the agenda dated February 22nd, 2022?
I move that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve the agenda dated February 22nd, 2022. Make sure we don't just say so moved now and that we did our Robert's Rules of Order.
Is there a second? Thank you, Director Campbell.
Second.
By the way, did you catch that part too? Or we? Yep. Okay.
I got that. President Bumpus.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve the agenda dated February 22nd, 2022. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, Okay, all opposed? Nope. Okay, it passes 5-0. Approval of agenda. Moving on to agenda item 2.01, Levy Conversation. We will go ahead and pass it on over to Acting Superintendent Kim Whitworth.
Thank you, Director Bumpus. And this is a really great assessment of the learning that you just had. So Director Campbell, nice job so far. Okay, so our levy didn't pass. Our February 2022 levy didn't pass. So the purpose of this meeting is to have a conversation about what are our next steps. And we are very fortunate to have Corey and John from DA Davidson here to talk to us about the pros and cons of running in April or August or November or next year or whatever they think, because they are the experts in this. Something else that we wanted to do is to share with the board our briefing paper that Cabinet did. And this is something that's on board docs for people who haven't had a chance to see it yet. And what that is it's just lays out some of the options and the pros and cons. And then in Cabinet, we discussed this quite a bit over a few days and came to a recommendation about what we thought was our best next step. And we also have Brenda, who's going to go over some of the budgeting pieces to that. And we're all going to be able to answer some questions. The final piece to this agenda is going to be to vote on resolution number 3, 2022 on running the levy again this April. So with that, I think if we can start with John and Corey, just to kind of talk us through next steps and what you're recommending. And you have had a chance to read the briefing paper, correct? Because I know there's some general, like, this is best practice. This is best practice, and then we also have to take our context in. So I think hopefully that gave you enough information to talk us through that.
And I think I speak for John when that's a very thorough paper. I mean, there's not a lot we can add. We have a few comments about pros and cons and things to consider and some data and some historical trending, but that was a very thorough review of both sides of the equation. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I don't want that one. I'm going to share my screen here. I just have a couple slides. Let me know if you can see that presentation. Okay, it says Monroe School District February election update. Great. So as I move along, hopefully you see on slide 1 now a list of the most recent years, last 2 decades of EP&O election results. And in tan shows the yes percentage. There's a little green marker that says simple majority approved between 2007 and 2008. That's when validation became no longer an issue for EP&O levies. So it did not matter how many voters showed up. What matters is if you're 50% plus 1, no longer 60% plus 1 with validation. Since then, you'll notice 98%, 96%, 97%. We've had such great success in a post supermajority world for EP&O levies until recently. You'll notice a downward trend starting in 2018. And for those of you that have been in school districts as long as I have, you'll notice that one of the biggest differences since then was McCleary. And a lot of the communication that surrounded the McCleary bill, whether it was state taxation, whether it was spirited negotiations, there was a lot of confusion around the changes to our education system. And that was one of the biggest changes in the way we finance education in the last 35, 40 years. So we don't think it's a coincidence that these support percentages have been dropping post McCleary. And now on top of that, throw the current environment with the pandemic and a lot of the news today. So one thing that I just like to show is you're not alone. This is something that has become a new thing that districts are dealing with. In 2021, we had 12 districts in the same position. And in this year, we have 17. So you're one of 17 throughout the state that are really geographically spread out across the entire state that are going through the same thing. And so yeah, you're not alone. We're also seeing the lowest percentage numbers in capital levies. I'm not going to stay on this number too long. And bonds. John Gores and I work almost exclusively in supporting our school district clients with bond support. And it's also been very difficult to pass capital financing at the same time. But really, I think, when we read that summary that was created by the district, a lot of it resolves around April versus November. And this is the statistics since 2000. I've also narrowed the focus on a future slide since simple majority, since we know that's changed a lot of things here. But one deal thing is April, by far in tan, has success of 89.7%, yes, while November is 81.3%. One thing that we're noticing, John and I's trends is November has been getting stronger and stronger over the last 3 to 5 elections. And not sure if that's turnout, because we're seeing record numbers of turnouts for presidential elections and midterm elections. But November is rallying right now. And one thing that we don't consider too often is August. And I think I saw the messages in your white paper about in August, there's vacations, there's the lack of involvement, community engagement, everybody's barbecuing on the road, getting ready for the new school year, and schools aren't top of mind. We may see fire districts, parks, and rec as front of mind in an August election, but not school districts. Another thing to point out is this result is somewhat of an anomaly. When you look at Monroe School District success for EP&O levies in green, you'll see the previous low over the last 2 decades was a little bit over 54%, which John and I would call a landslide. So I think this is another thing to take into consideration as a school board, that this is an anomaly and how to address that anomaly and what can we learn from the community as they voice this election result, and what can we gain from that. One thing to point out is the limitations on levies, and I think the district's full aware of this, is in red we have highlighted that the levy is being made not oftener. I know that I thought that might not be a word, but this is in the Constitution, not oftener than twice in a 12-month period. So one thing to keep in mind, we did a sampling of districts between 20 and 21 that struggled. And what you'll notice is the trend is the districts that failed in February made some decisions about either doing it in April or August of the existing year. August did not do well. We're seeing a real challenge for August. But then most of those districts that were trying again in 21 opted for April. And we think that comes down to the fact of what is the definition of that 12-month period? Do you have the flexibility, should you choose April today, to choose February in the future? And I hate to defer the answer to this question, but I think that would be left to bond counsel and legal counsel to determine, because you can see here that not a district tested that theory that a February in 21 is oftener than February in 2 attempts in the previous year. So you'll notice they all opted for going in April or later in 21 because of that oftener than twice in a 12-month period. So that's one thing to keep in mind, the difference between going in April now versus November. Will that limit any kind of option for February of 23, which we really shouldn't be considering right now? I think the number one goal should be the success of the second attempt rather than brainstorming what could be possibly done in 2023. The focus of this slide is to make sure you know that this isn't technically an RCW or WAC. This is basically in our Constitution in Article 7, Section 2A on running twice in a calendar year. This is really the meat and potatoes of our information, and I'll ask John here to chip in as well as I complete this, but this is since 2008. So these percentages are a little bit different than that first slide that we shared, because this is really comparing all issues since simple majority was put into place. And we show you your last 3 options, April, August, or November. And I like to focus on that third row down that says second attempts, because I think we want to compare yourself to like-sized issues, to like-minded issues. We're not really interested in who passed their first attempt or who passed a supplemental levy. How did districts in your shoes do in these 3 elections? And if you follow that second attempt column, you'll see that 18 out of 20 passed in April. By far, April is the most attempted month when it comes to your second attempt, but 90% success also in November. So statistically, they're very, very similar with just a larger sample size in April. 2 out of 7 in August. As we said, August is very difficult, not something that we don't get in the business of offering advice, but this is almost one area where we would almost give you advice to avoid August unless there was some kind of extra circumstance that we weren't considering in your community. We also like to put who was successful in green, because you might see some of your neighbors or some of your like-sized districts, maybe in your competitive sports leagues. And sometimes we notice a lot smaller districts tend to run in November or August, depending on the timing. So we did list names of those 18 and those 9 that did pass. But I think a lot of these items were covered in your working paper. One of the pros from April is budgeting. When we're looking at staff, I worked for 15 years at the Educational Service District, and we really debated each time we had a school district fail their first attempt, would OSPI allow them to adopt a budget with a revenue that has not been approved by voters yet? And that was a real case-by-case basis that was analyzed. Also, time. April there's a big negative. You don't have a lot of time, but it's also top of mind for a lot of voters. So another thing to consider, while you lose time to prepare, it is still very top of mind. And a couple of the pros for November being the time, of course, and the 9 out of 10, 90% success rate. One of the challenges with our November are the certifications. The November 8th levy does not certify until November 29th. You literally have 1 day to certify that levy to the county officials for collection. Not saying it can't be done, but we are saying is there are some challenges for that taxation, and there just is room for error. We've seen this happen before. As you notice, 9 out of 10 districts have done this and passed levies since simple majority in November. So we're not saying it's an obstacle you can't overcome, but there are some challenges to November with timing and board action and when you meet and certification of that levy to the county. And I feel like, John, what other pros and cons am I missing here for April and November? You're on mute.
One of the things that I noticed in the April elections from before was districts deciding to go in April based not only on the research that shows it's a better time to go, but also unknowingly at the time thought the pandemic would be over by April. And that's why and then there was a group that decided, well, let's go in August because by then the pandemic will certainly be over. Well, neither of those proved to be right, but those who ran in April certainly performed better than those who ran in August, where I believe it was 0 for 5 that ran in the last August. And then as Corey mentioned, November, it's positive, but it is a lower sample size. And that levy certification can be tricky. Again, it's something can be worked out, but that's just another issue to put on your pros and cons page.
And John, this shows that slide of certification. If we follow November along, here shows the county certification date of November 29th. And levy certifications are due to the county commissioners November 30th. So that's just kind of emphasizing that point here. And another challenge today is resolution filing deadline, of course, is this Friday for April. So a lot of challenging timelines in advance here. Just sharing some of my personal observations of working with school levies for almost 21, 22 years. A lot of February elections are built around sharing the successes of what those local resources are used for, whether it's extracurricular, drama, unfunded teachers, class size enhancements, school nurses. I think sometimes in April, we notice a little bit of a more of approach that we don't see in February, where the voter said no, and this is what it means. We didn't want to show you the negatives in February because we're so excited about the positive things we're doing with the levy. But in April now, this is what it means to the community. And so sometimes those are top of mind in April. And that can also be addressed in November as well. But we think we can attribute the higher than average second attempt to success to the communication of what those local dollars are for. There's always some miscommunications. It's not a simple process to divide state dollars from local dollars. So it's a challenge to communicate. And an April election does provide some timeline challenges, and your district is different now. I talked about McCleary. You are no longer a $2.50 per pupil maximum levy district. You are limited by a per pupil number that is dropping every year. So you are unique in that perspective that you're not as positively impacted as other districts might be by McCleary. and your levy has been limited a little bit more than you would have been in the past. So there are a couple of communication things that are hard to communicate. They're harder to absorb now that there's rules are different. But I think we've taken up enough time, Brenda. Is there anything else we could address that we spoke of earlier?
Brenda, you're muted. Double muted.
Double muted. Does the board have any questions from John and Corey?
Well, thank you for your time. We know it's a difficult decision and can be a very frustrating one as well, but I think there's a couple good options in front of you.
Why don't we quickly just jump over to the levy briefing paper, and if you are an audience member, you can go to board docs and there is a copy of it there. We have 4 options that we considered. The first option on here is run another levy in April 2022 and have it be a 1-year levy. And this was a great idea from somebody at the Northwest ESD. And it was kind of a, okay, so we heard you. There's some things that we need to fix. There's some things that we need to improve, and give us a year to see if we can get all of this together. And then we can run another one in February. Option B is run another levy in April and have it be a 4-year levy. No changes in the cost. Third was run another levy campaign in November of 2022. And then last, of course, was run another levy campaign in August 2022, and August just wasn't an option. So if you go down, just to cut to the chase, so we did the pros and cons for each of those. We also just wanted to kind of scope out what would it take to pass a levy in April, kind of like what's the plan. So we started, just kind of mapping out what the work we would have to do. We did the same thing for November. And one of the things that we added in there, and Brenda was very thorough, and just including how are we going to mitigate cuts that impact students? And again, what's the plan? So the staff recommendation and reasoning, and this is getting towards the end, depending on if your paper is sideways or vertical, but it says we struggle to come to consensus between April and November. We know the cuts we will have to make if we don't have a pass levy in April will impact students and staff. We also know that there are too many things for us to address between now and April that will reassure our community. If the levy doesn't pass in April, then the consequences will be even more impactful, since that will be our last chance for this calendar year. So our recommendation was for what month? We recommended November. And again, I just put in there, we were split between April and November. While we understand the impact to the system, we believe that in the long run, healing and building trust and relationships with our community is critical to our success in having a strong school district. For how much? We said same rate as February 2022 election. And the reason for that is we could have asked for more and we didn't. We asked for exactly what we think we need to take care of our kids and run of our programs, no more, no less. And for how long? In November, we'd like to run it for 4 years. So with that, before Brenda starts talking about the budget and all of that stuff, are there any questions about the briefing paper? And anything that any cabinet members would like to add? And you can always ask questions later too. Brenda, do you want to talk about the budget?
I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see this? It was also posted on board docs. And I just want to explain what this document is showing us. This far left column is what types of expenditures we have in the district. The current year total is what we budgeted in 21-22 and how we spent it. So this 97,791,744 is what we budgeted in 21-22. And the line items, the rows, indicate where we spent those resources. In the second column, the 21-22 non-levy revenue, that is the dollars that we budgeted for 21-22, and from the state funds, the federal funds, and the other local revenue that is not taxes, not property taxes. And so that added up to the 81 million that you see at the bottom. The next column is what we budgeted based on levy dollars. So of that 16.5 million, we counted on the 14,640,000 to come from the levy, and we budgeted 1,948,559 to come from fund balance. That was how our budget was set up for 21-22. So I did the exact same thing for 22-23. The difference is that for 22-23, I had to make assumptions. And the biggest assumption or declaration disclaimer that I made is that these numbers for next year will change. This is on the information that we have today. I used current. I have completed the enrollment projections for next year, and I applied those enrollment projections to this year's prototypical funding model. And so what that means is that once legislation passes and we have a conference budget for 22-23, I will be able to update those with any changes that the legislation has made. And I anticipate that any changes to those factors in the prototypical funding model will be to our advantage, which means that our non-levy revenue will probably increase as a result of those changes. The other thing that I assumed is based on our expenditures. So the expenditures are increased based on collective bargaining agreements. It's based on a IPD that is currently established and not confirmed, but what is posted on OSPI's website for next year for every other bargaining group. I do have to say we have PSE, PSEOP, and MPA that are bargaining this spring and summer, and those possible increases are not included in this projection, just the IPD that is published today. Again, the IPD is being questioned for next year because there was a significant inflationary factor in calendar year 21 and 22. And so there's an anticipation that might impact our IPD for next year, which will impact what we have already bargained and what we will bargain this spring and summer. Payroll taxes and benefits, I increased by 2% in this model, as well as all the material, supplies, and operating costs. I also budgeted or planned as an increase of 2%. Some are out of our control. Some we will, during this process, reduce or eliminate once we move forward with our budgeting process. But in this model, it's a 2% for all non-employee costs. I assumed in this funding model that all categorical programs, meaning transitional bilingual, CTE, LAP, highly capable, all of the categorical programs, with the exception of special education and transportation, will be budgeted neutrally, meaning the expenditures will not exceed the revenues. That's another assumption. I also assumption that indirect rates for all of those grants will be applied back to this model for expenditures in other areas. And most of the indirects, the district captures, some, however, we don't. So again, I assume that the indirect rates will be collected in all of our categorical programs. Before I go on to my next assumptions, I wanted to point your attention to the levy and fund balance column. And essentially that shows that we're anticipating 21,582,000 as what is levy or fund balance funded in this model. We're anticipating the $7.3 million levy because we don't have a levy for 2023 at this point. And so that means that the 14 million, we would have to determine how we were going to make that up at this point. At the time that I did this, down here on the bottom are the potential offsetting savings and revenues. We could stop non-essential expenditures for this year, and that would build up a little bit more in our fund balance so that we can offset this cost next year. We're anticipating, when I did this over the weekend, we were anticipating enrollment stabilization if it was passed by legislation. Today, the House and the Senate began the bargaining or the conversations about the supplemental budget for 22. And the Senate has it written in there that they will provide us 50% of the actual enrollment that we lost. The House, however, has it in their budget or their conversation or their bill that they would only look at revenue loss relative to our 21-22 budget. And we did a really good job on our enrollment projections for 21-22. So if the House bill is ultimately the one that is passed, that enrollment stabilization dollars would not come to the district. And that was just posted this afternoon, late breaking news. I believe that it will probably be closer to the Senate budget. And if it is less, I believe that it will probably be some hybrid, but we don't know until that is decided. Next, our current fund balance policy is 5% of current year revenues plus that 1,115,000. So we could, board could adjust that policy just down to 5%. And that would give us back 1,115,000 in fund balance that we could spend. And the other alternative that's listed on here is that we could have a discussion about whether or not the board would be willing to reduce fund balance at this time. All three of those options would reduce our fund balance. And once we reduce the fund balance, then we don't have it for 23-24 in case we're in this situation for 23-24. We also have federal dollars coming in, again, also one-time revenues. We have not yet touched our ESSER 3 dollars, the 80%, that's 3,400,000. And we have not yet touched our ESSER 3 for learning recovery, that 20%. And that's a little, I put 800, but it's a little bit more than 800. And so those dollars, if we don't use them this year, will be available to use next year for ESSER related things. So those are our sources of offsetting revenue. And then at the very bottom, I put a 3.24% reduction overall for the entire budget. So that would in effect reduce our expenditures and draw down our fund balance. And so now I'm going to go back to my assumptions and disclaimers. I assume that our fund balance will be about 12 million at the end of the year. And that assumption is based on where we currently are and average expenditures throughout the year. And it's assuming that close to $2 million that we are anticipating in federal E-rate dollars for the purchase of all of our Chromebooks, that we'll get it this year. It has been granted to us. And so I'm still watching for it. And so the assumption is that that money will come in. So 12 million, our current fund balance is 5% of revenues plus that $1.1 million. And so that's approximately 5.6 million, which means that half of our fund balance at this point is reserved for board policy. So that leaves us 6 million. Some of it will be obligated at the end of the year for money that we received this year, such as LAP and CTE, those types of dollars that we get for specific purposes. We'll have to set that we didn't spend this year. We'll have to set those aside to spend in those categorical programs next year. Some of this will have to be reserved at year end for prepayments that we make for next year. And the rest is at the discretion of the superintendent. And so we'll have to make hard decisions about what we carry over for next year, what types of things will be eligible for carryover in light of this forecast. Any questions? That's a high level overview, but because we know what ballpark we're in, we can start having conversations right away and start talking about what this will look like for next year.
Brenda, I have a kind of a summary question. In end of all of that, that's the earmarked dollars like for CTE and anything else. Do you have an exact or at least a very close estimate to how much will be available that is not earmarked, that are discretionary funds, basically that levy dollars would be at the same discretionary use for EP&O money? How much are we going to have, and how much would we have actually needed? You know, if you're projecting maybe 12 million, or and some of that is earmarked, how much are we looking?
Typically
less than.
Yeah, typically what we earmark for unspent categorical programs and prepayments is probably between 200,000 and 500,000.
Okay, is that including CTE dollars?
Mm-hmm.
So
They're
what are you looking at for fund balance less that money then? What kind of a
11.5 if I go with the maximum amount.
500,000 from the 12 million. And what would we have actually needed from levy for that then? Was it 16?
Yes.
So we're still short $4.5 million roughly.
Yeah, and the reason why this is so high above what our levy was is because this year, for 21-22, we adjusted staffing for COVID, maximum 3 foot distancing. We had still a lot of PPE expenditures, and we did not make reductions. And so we filled up the gap in 21-22 with ESSER 2 and FEMA dollars. And so we are looking at not only the loss of half of our levy, but the amount that we did not cut for 21-22, plus the increases that we're projecting in this very conservative model.
Would anybody in the board like to have us just kind of go through maybe April 1 year and November for a year? Or, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward, but we can certainly go over those two options if you think it would be helpful.
I appreciate the work that you guys put into that white paper. For me, it's very detailed and very explanatory. I'm not sure if anybody else wants it, but for me, it was pretty clear.
I wanted to point out that knowing this information now allows us to make appropriate reductions so that in our process, we will have a priority list. And we will present a budget in July that reflects what the board's decision is regarding fund balance and reductions that are recommended by the board. But we will also have a very detailed list on when the levy passes in November. This is the list of things we can bring back. And so restoration of our expenditures will be very quick. The board at that time will again have to probably have a very quick meeting to not only pass a resolution to recertify, as John had mentioned, that we do have to recertify our levy by November 30th. So we will have to have the work done in order to do that, which means you'll pass a resolution to recertify a higher number. And typically I can file that via email. We will just have to have a passed resolution to do that.
With this, with getting the notice to the county by November, by that certification date, will that safeguard the tax dollars? So they're received in April and in November, or they're posted in September, but are they usually paid by November? Are we going to be losing out for one of those semi-annual payments?
No, because when we recertify in November, that's what will be on the tax bill in February.
One thing I asked about a while ago, Brenda, is you were talking about your assumptions of 2% for different categories, but we know inflation's about 7.5%. Fuel being the main driver. You had said you'd taken that into account previously. Is that's still the case, or?
Well, the way that I take it into account is that right now, my assumption is 2% on every material supply and operating cost line item that's in our budget. And some of those line items won't exist anymore or will be significantly smaller. So that 2% offsets higher increases in the areas that are still in the budget. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's a lot of information you're presenting us, and a lot of financial detail so you talked about the money that's available and that we'd be short. Is the matter of staff reduction, is it just made up by the shortage of the fund balance? If individuals we're short that amount, and then we'd have to come out and take the numbers, reduce the payroll from those categories in the 22-23 fund balance.
what we'll do is we'll go over, every category of spending and determine its efficiency relative to community and district priorities. And it will most likely impact staffing, but with reductions, we try very hard to keep reductions as far away from the classroom as possible. It's not always the outcome, but that's what we try to do. And again, we have to do it and present you a budget within the board parameters. And so we will ultimately be asking the board if fund balance is an option. It might not be an option. That's a discussion that the board will have to have a conversation about. But ultimately, if the board chooses to make up some of the difference from fund balance, then it means that the reductions are less. It also means that reductions will probably extend 2 years. Anyway, we'll have to make reductions for the 22-23 year, and we'll probably have to still tweak it even with a levy passage for 23-24 to make sure that we more closely align with the number of students that we have in the district.
Very complicated equation.
Yes, sir.
The state provides staffing reimbursements or costs for the number of students, the teachers per the number of students. And I know that's per grade level. So if this wasn't to pass, then we would need to evaluate whether to increase the class size, because we'd have a less payroll for teachers. Do you know how much?
The state provides funding based on prototypical models that they've developed. The state does not tell us how many staff members to have. Does that make sense? The only compliance requirement that we currently have is K3 and that ratio. But again, the state provides funding and the district choice is how we want to spend it, with the exception of K3.
Brenda, so I'm just taking a look at option C right now. If we were to wait till November 2022, part of that was if we wait, funding from the levy would not be included in the budget, resulting in expenditure reductions. That means staff, athletics, professional development, etc. When I think of what what I'm staying grounded in is helping provide some stability and predictability. And I'm not sure how to do that. And so I was wondering what that actually means, right? What does it mean to reduce staff, to reduce athletics, professional development, et cetera, as it says in November, or if we go with the November 2022 option, because I would like to make every effort not to reduce staff and negatively impact our kids even further, especially considering the past couple of years that we've had. And so I'm wondering what exactly that looks like.
Honestly, Jen, we haven't had an opportunity yet to start having those detailed conversations. And so all I can promise is that as we go through those conversations, that the board will know. We have to start the budget process. And so right now on paper, we're going to have to start looking at those reductions anyway. The only advantage is in April, is that we would know in April. And if the levy doesn't pass, then a lot of the work would be done. However, adding things back in April, we're kind of fighting against that May 15th deadline. And so we would have to have a board meeting and be ready at the end of April for any possible RIF notices and notifications to any bargaining units about what we're riffing and why. And April just presents a more challenging time to get all of that done. If we do it now and work with the knowledge that it's not in there yet, then we can be more intentional in our conversations, and we can create a list of what we're adding back when the levy passes in November. Does that make sense? And rather than rushing at the very end to try to tie up all the loose ends before that April 30th deadline to notify folks. Does that make sense?
Can you explain that a little bit? I know you and I sat a little bit, but so it sounds like the May 15th is our contractual deadline.
It's a state deadline. It's a WAC deadline. We have no control over the May 15th deadline. What is part of our contractual obligation is that we have to notify MEA especially of any RIF notices by 2 weeks before May 15th, which is the end of April. Which means the board would have to pass a resolution and do all of that at our last meeting in April. Does that help?
It's heavy, but it helps.
It's heavy. Yes.
So my question is, if we go for November, we have to send out the RIF notices. So the reduction in staff. So how do we start the school year with teachers that we're going to replace or a reduction in staff? Am I thinking about that right? We have to do that in advance of running the election in November. So the damage would be done preemptively. And because there's also teachers that have to be, that would be the time that teachers would be hired or looking to be hired. It would just seem to be doing a lot of things on faith right at that point, and would be I'm kind of trying to put one in front of the other. You know, you're going to be reduced, but we need the teachers there until November. Is there anybody can explain that? I'm not used to this type of concept.
Can I jump in real quick? So in an ideal world, we would run in April and it would pass, and we would not have to do significant budget reductions and RIFs. But our community voted no and is communicating something to us. And we need to weigh, is it likely that if we run in April, will it pass? Because if it's not likely or it doesn't pass, we are out of a lot of funding for at least a year. And those RIFs will happen regardless. and we'll be in a world of hurt. So if it's more likely that it's going to pass in November, it would be in our favor to temporarily lose people and then have it pass in November and then be able to restore that funding. That's kind of what you're weighing here. Either situation is really ideal.
And just some preliminary conversations about, because we're trying to, hoping for the best, planning for the worst. And we started thinking about, okay, so a priority is going to be classrooms. We've got to make sure that our certificated and our paraprofessionals and our nurses and our librarians and all of these people are in place, because that's the teaching and learning piece. Second priority is going to be activities and athletics. The first thing that's going to go is probably professional development and that stuff. So protecting the classroom and those direct services to students is going to be a priority. But we also know that 80-something% of our budget is, staffing. So it's not like there's a lot left over after that, but that's kind of how we were thinking of prioritizing. We haven't, as Brenda said, we haven't got into the weeds about specifically where that happens yet.
So I think I have a question and then maybe also kind of a comment that draws, I think, a lot on the questions that President Bumpus was asking, and also some of maybe what Director Whitfield was asking. I too just want to know what it actually looks like, what it actually means to lose this funding. And I feel like one of the biggest messages that we got from our community was, what does it actually pay for? And I don't think that we answered that. So my question is, if we were to run it in April, would we be able to provide that information by then? And if not, why? And when would we actually have that information available? I get the priority list, I agree with that, but what does it actually mean? I think that we're not being clear enough for me, and I don't think probably we're being clear enough for the community about what it actually means to lose this funding.
And this was a conversation that we started having October, November, when we were putting this together. And there was a slide, Brenda, that said the levy funds, specifically how many teachers, how many paraprofessionals. Do you remember that slide?
I do. Our issue is, and will always be probably, is that when we say that the state funds, say for example, the state funds one teacher, the state partially funds one teacher for Monroe School District. It does not fund one teacher, because the money that we are provided for one teacher is less than what we pay our average teacher. And so technically everybody in the district, with the exception of 6-hour paras, are partially funded by the levy, technically. And so when we try to break it down, we're looking at, when I shared the screen of certificated instructional teachers, that 3.9, if you take that 3.9 million and divide it by this year's number, the average teacher is $130,000. That's how many teachers indirectly are paid for from the levy. Now that number includes enrichment contracts, which were not funded for at all by state dollars. That includes English stipends and safety stipends, and it includes professional development. It includes per diem pay. It includes all of those little things that add up that are paid for out of the levy. Same for the classified staff, same for the admin staff. And so there's little pieces of everybody that is paid for out of the levy. We don't divide our people and say that these people are paid for out of the levy and these people are paid for out of basic ed dollars. It's safe to say that a majority of our people are partially funded from levy dollars because we don't get that money from the state. One FTE in OSPI's world is not one FTE at Monroe School District. Does that make sense? That's what makes our calculation so difficult.
I think that, so I get that the calculation end of it could be that difficult, but you just saying that is such a different message than anything I have heard before. And I hope that going forward, we figure out how to say it. Because that's a huge, if I'm sitting there looking at my ballot about, do I vote for this levy or not? And I'm thinking that this impacts every single teacher and certificated staff member in our district, is such a different message from the state doesn't pay for all of the teachers that we want to provide. Does that resonate with anybody else? It feels like such a different message. It has personalized it for me. I hope that regardless of when we decide to run it, we go with that personal message.
Can I piggyback on Director Johnson as well with this? I think for me as well, trying to just put my voter hat on or my dad hat on as a parent in the district. And when I vote, one of the things I think that is important to try and keep the perspective, and I know we here get a different perspective than the majority of the community because we're knee deep in all of it. But I think that to understand if we do put it on the ballot in April or August or November, and it doesn't pass, what is Monroe School District going to look like? How many teachers are going to be gone? How big are my kids' classrooms going to be in student to teacher ratio? What sports and extracurricular and administrators are all going to disappear? What nurses are going to disappear? What counselors are going to disappear? I think that our community, to help them understand when they, again, this is a very serious matter that our community, we need to understand, okay, if we do vote no again, here's what Monroe School District is going to look like. This is what the new district looks like. If we have to do a reduction in force and eliminating programs and basically tightening the belt in every line item we can find, here's the new Monroe School District. There is no football. There is no basketball. There is no chess club. There is no debate team. There is no DECA. There is no FBLA. Whatever that is, there is, your classrooms are 40 students instead of 30. I'm not meaning to be hyperbolic, but our community needs a realistic picture of what it's going to look like. I know that it's spider webs to everybody, and that's true. But then what is it going to look like when I sit there and say, okay, my second grader next year is not going to be in a classroom of 19 or 21 students. She's going to be in a classroom of 35 students because we had to eliminate staff. And so I think if we can create a model of what that would look to help us see what Monroe School District with Levy failed really does look like, I think that's going to also present a very clear message for our community. And it's an important message that needs to be part of the conversation.
And that model will start developing probably immediately, because this is a project that will take a little bit of time to paint that picture, but part of the picture ultimately will be the parameters that the board sets regarding available resources to us.
Well, I'm just going to go up there and be in favor of going into April. Speaking for myself, I think it makes it, it gives us more of a sense of urgency. It can be communicated in a different way, as Director Campbell mentioned. The matters of things going on, they're being handled and are in motion. And I think that communicating the real needs and the problems that are going to occur, and be proactive and have the affected individuals and the groups go out. And it's just getting people, I know somebody can answer this, I don't have it in front of me, the percentage of people that even voted, if we could get that up. Of course, I have the can-do attitude and let's get it going. And I think we can get it done. So I'm just going to throw it out there for my piece.
I'm just, sorry. What was
Go
that?
ahead.
Okay, I was just wondering how, so I'm looking at an MEA contract or a contract right here with MEA, right? And I'm wondering how we remain committed to our contractual obligations. Like I look up class size, for example, I'm wondering how we remain committed to those obligations if we don't have the funds. Like what's the plan if we don't have the money to fund the things, right? What can we do about diversity, equity, inclusion? What do we do about special education programs? What do we do about hiring new people to help with the diversity, equity stuff in our district? How do we pay for extracurricular activities? How do we do this for kids? How do we keep them healthy? How do we keep them safe? And so it really does. I'm thinking of my own children. I have 3 children in the school district, and all 3 of them are part of all of these things. And so, and it makes me think of all of this students and all of the families in our school district and how that directly impacts them. Just thinking out loud.
So, I think everybody in cabinet, we really wanted to go for April. We wanted the 1 year in April. When we kept like poking at it from all sides. And we have concerns that it's not going to pass in April, even if we let people know. I mean, I think I appreciate Director Campbell. And I started to write down some of the stuff that Brenda was saying. We had it flipped for sure. We were trying to be very, very positive. There were, I think maybe the first levy meeting I did at a superintendent chat where cabinet was on the screen, and we had Joanne and we had David and we had Victor and Chris and everybody talk about, in your department, what does the levy fund? What are some things that support the work from your perspective? And so we shared that. Next time we should capture it, maybe record it and capture it. So I do wonder if the community doesn't already understand that there's going to be an impact, and they still said, we're not happy and we're not voting. So again, whatever the board decides, you're going to have a team of people who are going to do their very best to make it happen. That's not a question. I just wanted to make sure that I feel like I have to say again that we really wanted April, and the 1 year just seemed kind of like, okay, we we're hanging on to it. And we just were not convinced enough that April would pass. We think we have a lot of work to do to build trust, to really not just say things, but actually do some things that people are asking us to do between now and November. But we're all making predictions. Nothing's for sure. I mean, I could be completely wrong.
Brenda, can we financially support the things from now until November? Like, are we in a good position as a district to support that?
Are you asking if we could wait until the outcome of a November election to make reductions? The answer is no. And the reason why I feel that way is we have that May 15th deadline. And so we won't be able to make those types of reductions after May 15th. And I would hate for all of the reductions to fall on the backs of our classified folks. Our paraeducators, our bus drivers, our office staff. And after April, that's where it falls. if the levy doesn't pass. So long-term, no, I don't believe that we could.
Kim, have your team considered with the recent events about this mask mandate potentially coming off on March 21st? That could be a pro and a con, depending on what happens. You guys talked about that. A lot of people are passionate, both sides. What would you think? Well, why don't you give me both sides? If it does, and if it doesn't.
I don't want to get ahead of having a conversation with labor partners. We've already started setting up meetings with them, and I think it's really important that just professional courtesy, that I don't start making predictions and making promises and offering solutions. I think we all know that there are some people who really do not want us to put masks on kids. And we have some people who are very concerned about the health of their children and their families and our staff. If we don't wear masks, not going to be an easy answer. And as you said, either way. So we will be having those conversations. I just want to make sure that we're not jumping too far ahead of that.
I can appreciate that. Thank you.
Director Barnes, you've been very quiet. I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Well, you guys have asked and said a lot of the things that I was going to. I think my initial thought on this is listening to everything that the community has had to say, and how we have many people on both sides of the spectrum on this that are very unhappy for multiple different reasons. I do not think running this in April is going to make one iota of a difference. There is not enough time to have made changes. There's not enough space to have forgotten any of the things that have taken place. I think showing the community how the lack of these dollars is going to impact will be a strong picture for them. I mean, sometimes you need to experience it in order to go, oh, wow, I didn't realize it would have that big of an impact. I think a lot of people know. I think they're trying to send a big message with what it is that they're saying. And I think that running in April, we could potentially be shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak, just because, you know, I don't think that it will pass, and then we have to wait an even longer amount of time until we possibly do get funds. Even though I think the 1 year option seems like, you know, a decent kind of compromise, but I still just don't think anyone is going to go for it at this point, given the animosity and the turmoil within our own community and what we seem to be experiencing. I don't, as much as I wish things were different, and I wish that we had the funding so that we could continue all these wonderful things and not be having this conversation. Realistically, I just don't see it. I don't. I think our best bet is to run it in November. I really do. We can get more input. We have more time to put things together. We will be able to partner with more people. We'll have some space between everything that's been going on with DEI, the superintendent, you know, and then just masks. I think a lot of people want to know what this is going to look like, what the outcome of this is going to be. So, you know, I think we need some answers for the community, and they need to see some things before they're going to be willing to trust us, you know, with this money and say, here you go. So that's my 2 cents. Oh, and great job, everybody on, I mean, Brenda, your presentations are always top notch with, I mean, just everything. You answer all of the questions, the budget, levy spreadsheets, you know, the pros and cons of each. I mean, everybody did such an amazing job to lay it out there. And here's what it is, you know, with not a ton of questions left that needed to be asked. So I truly appreciate all the time and effort that everybody took to put into that and to present that to us in such a short turnaround time period. I felt like. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Director Barnes, thank you for that. Brenda, wait, I think you said I was not your most favorite person when you left on Friday, but you turned it around on Monday, so I am one of your favorite people again, something like that. But yeah, Brenda had to put in some hours this weekend to get the budget stuff ready to go.
I'd be interested to know if any of the fellow leaders have any comments, the executive team, that we might not be picking up on. If anybody would like to jump in, it's good. It helps me to get additional perspectives and to get to help formulate things, because it is a very complex decision.
I think just from my perspective, and I think Kim summarized it really well, we were really trying to convince ourselves that let's go with April, because none of us want to have to deal with, coming up with recommended reductions. Is going to be, programmatic staffing and all that. Just, with the hope that we would pass in April. But I think just the reality, as we looked at it, kind of honestly, and Aaron said it well also, is, community has spoken pretty loudly as far as where their level of trust is in the district. And April is really a short turnaround to change that. We just know that there's not going to be closure on most, if not all, of the kind of ongoing issues. So for myself, I had to wrap myself around, saying, yeah, we're going to need to do those reductions. But kind of just looking at it objectively, I think we just needed to look at what gives us the best opportunity to pass this, because a double levy failure would just be catastrophic for the district.
Well, I guess I can speak a little too. Chuck, what I did is I looked at the same thing. I looked at our department and just looked at fuel costs alone and what it takes to not only just run a bus, but run food back and forth and getting food to market. As you guys all know, when we go to the stores now, how much just our own probably personal family budgets have been exhausted due to inflation and things like that. So that was one of my big factors that I looked at is if we barely made it with the funding we had and presented to you and to the community, how are we going to do it again in the future as we come up there? So that's still a big question. How do we provide the same service level just out of your support services department? And Director Barnes, I agree with you. I don't know what we would have changed between now and April, or could conceivably change and still meet all the state guidelines that Brenda spoke about. We're talking about people too, their livelihoods. When Brenda used the word RIF, I'm not sure, I know the board probably knows, but the public, that's called reduction in force. That means we're actually letting people go. And it's very hard in this market even to get people to work for us and for anybody. I mean, the people aren't out there. And once you let somebody go, the odds of them coming back are very slim in your future. So the risk we're taking at this time is what the people voted for. But unfortunately, I call it, you can't write checks if you don't have money in the checkbook. And it's very difficult. So there's, compliments. Thank you for your compliments. It was a lot of work doing a lot of that. We did ponder everything from the mass to where does the money come from to run a sports program? What do we do come Friday nights in the fall when you don't have sports? There's a lot of, everybody's impacted. So if that helps, but I think a lot of just the community inflation folks, for lack of better words, I just look at what it takes to put fuel in the tank of a car, let alone our buses, let alone moving food to and from and getting food to market. again, from the support services side, or buying roofing material, buying anything with PVC that's made out of petroleum. That's just one aspect, if that helps. The costs are not going to go down. So, hate to be the Grim Reaper, but it's not an easy task to do. We're going to be asked to do.
Hi, folks. So, when we talked about this cabinet, to Kim's point, it was really a hard look at how realistic April would have been. And it's important that we get this stuff back in front of voters, because I think, like everyone said already, folks send a very clear message, and we need to honor that. And we can if we wait. It's not ideal, and we know that it's going to affect bottom line. People are going to lose their jobs. Programs are going to get cut, and it's going to hurt. We're going to feel it. Every school will feel it one way or another. And at the same time, public spoken, and we need to step up, and we need to engage with the community so that we can better serve better serve the community, better serve our kids and our families. My biggest fear is really around counselors at the elementary level. We have 5.5 paid for. And counselors help kids build resiliency. Counselors help kids build resiliency. That's not just the teacher's job. That's not just the school as a whole, their job. It's how counselors engage with kids to work through things and help them problem solve around social emotional issues, which are a big deal and happen constantly. And if we don't have that level of support, it's going to hurt. We're going to feel it. And right now, with the second year of this pandemic, and we're seeing behaviors in the buildings that are bigger than they have been in the past. They're more frequent, and our counselors are, they are an integral part of the community, and we can't do the work without them. But hopefully, we'll figure out a way to keep them. But that's what it will look like potentially at the elementary level. So it is a concern.
I know what that's like, Chris, firsthand, when my son was at Frank Wagner and there were no counselors and he was dealing with issues. I know how big of a problem that is. And the thing that breaks my heart about the entire thing is that through all of this, our kids are going to suffer more. They've already suffered so much over the last 2 years. And here we are, within the community, and just for reasons that these kids don't have any control over. And here we are, and we're just telling them, just gotta deal with it. This is what we're doing. And it's so hard because, they don't have a choice in it, because this is where they're going to school. It's up to us to provide for them. And that, for me, I think is the hardest pill to swallow, knowing how much it is going to affect these kids, especially the ones who need help the most, and it's not going to be there. Hopefully if this levy passes in November, we can bring things back. But yeah, that's the toughest part for me.
Getting back to my earlier point about that equation, first off, I really have a heart for people. And so even thinking about laying somebody off, that really pains my heart. And the teachers are the key aspect of the entire equation. If contractually we have to have the reduction in force within a short period of time, so it would seem that the smart ones would go out and start looking for a job, and we may not even have them available. So they're going to be working, know that their job is going to be 50-50, 60-40 chance is not going to be continued going into the fall or to the spring, and they wouldn't be paid. And being an employer, just knowing the challenge with the workforce, and to Victor's point about, the labor market. And plus, everybody's tired, the staff, the teachers. I know everybody on the screen is tired. So the human side, the human cost is what terrors me. But I appreciate the administrators, their perspectives. And if you have any other perspectives, please share, because it helps me formulate my thinking and my approach.
For me, I think every single person on the screen, the participants, and we're here for these kids. But this impacts more than just these kids. This impacts lots of families. And I know that D.A. Davidson, and we appreciate you guys and all the strategy and the statistics and understanding that. But again, we need to interpret that within our context and what we're dealing with. And I think everybody's really clear that I think that all of us have collectively in our emails, but also in personal conversations and personal contact as well. A lot of community members have, talked to us about, well, I voted no, but I didn't want to, but I need to send you a message, kind of a thing. And that message looks different, but it's basically the same overarching thing. And for me, if we try to just push this through as another strategy of saying, okay, well, if we do this and that, and then maybe we can get a yes vote. I think if I back, part of it is we're working hard to build trust in this community. And if we just push this through in April, that doesn't communicate that message. I don't think anybody's going to change their mind between now and then that voted, yes or no. They're going to vote the same way they voted probably. But it also gives us an opportunity to continue to have moments of, okay, we do want to hear you. Let's talk. Let's actually have that. And then it gives us time to say, look, we are working in this direction. Changes don't happen overnight. And I know our community knows that, but it gives us the time for them to see that. There are a lot of things, a lot of irons in the fire, if you will, for that metaphor, that there's that going to look like, and that's going to affect how I vote. And the impact question as well. Sarah, I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's the same kind of thing. Like, okay, not just with all the controversy that we've been trying to navigate this year, but also, okay, if I vote no, what does that do to my kids? What does that do to, and not just my kids, but that's the way a lot of parents are going to be thinking, but what does that do to people's jobs and lives and programs and trainings and everything? And so for me, if we're going to try and not just get a yes vote, but we're also to try and build trust, and trust not just with our community and voters, but trust with our labor partner, our union partners as well, saying, hey, we're listening, and we want to work together with our community and work together with our labor partners to do this for kids. I think that the best opportunity for that of a yes vote is November. And in my opinion, I'm really afraid that, and if we say April, we have to make a decision tonight. I mean, the resolution's on the docket for us to get it done if we do. But I think that rarely in decisions of this magnitude, when they're made in haste, are they wise decisions. And here we have the council of our entire executive team, which is brilliant team. Absolute, you guys, I admire you and I appreciate you all so much, and your transparency and struggling through this as well. But to ignore the recommendation of our cabinet, I think would be very unwise, because this is not a decision, again, that we're making in haste of just saying, let's just push through. We can do that, but if that we do actually shoot ourselves in the foot, and then in the end, lives are destroyed, and kids are going to suffer and struggle because of that. I mean, when I say lives are destroyed, jobs, programs, they're just going to disappear. And I don't want that to happen. And so if we have to say, okay, it's going to suck for a few months because we're going to have to make a budget based on maybe not, but then the community says, okay, you've built trust with us, we're going to rally behind you. And they say, okay, we want to do the funding. Let's do this together in November. We have the timeline to build that trust. And so that's the way I want to lean. And it's not just what is strategic, but it's what really gets people on board and lets people be heard. Because
And Chuck, I think it's really important that everybody in cabinet acknowledges what you're saying and what you're feeling, because we were all there. And I think I went into communications like 3 or 4 times a day, and I'd say, okay, I think we need to do it in April because of this, this, this. And then I'd go in, an hour later, I'm like, no, November, because of we were all just like trying to make April work. And I think Aaron and Tamara were like tallying April and November when I came in, but that was kind of that last meeting that we had. That morning was just, we just have to go with November. We just felt like it was the right thing to do based on what we were hearing from our community.
Well, I've been in marketing 30 years, and attack and divide and conquer. And so the short timeline, I'm not fearful of. The level, I think of it in terms of the level of risk. If we don't get it in November, then we're really screwed. We're screwed either way. I would go with November. I have no, I can't really offer a persuasive argument for that, other than to avoid the problems with the layoff and the RIF. I still think it's going to be problematic with laying people off. Yeah, you're laid off, come back to work, and we hope you don't go elsewhere because there's plenty of jobs available. So that's the level of risk, and it's weighing the lesser of, which one's the greater risk. The likelihood of it passing in November is good, but I think that also has the highest risk. But I would go with the cabinet's recommendation.
Can I ask somewhat to what Director Whitfield is talking about? Are there retention strategies for this kind of a situation? Knowing that you have to create a budget that includes RIFs, are there ways to promote retention? Are there ways to try to help people stay?
I think we're going to try to minimize that, and we're going to try to minimize looking at attrition, people who are retiring, moving on, all of that. Making sure that we're focused on the classroom and keeping that whole first. And in terms of retention strategies, this is a part that's new for me. Most of my hiring has been done outside of a pandemic, and I've gotten some of my best teachers in October, November, right? So I think in the long run, Sarah, a really great retention strategy is having a great district that people want to come to and people want to stay. So I think that's kind of part of that rationale that we put in there is the long game. The short term, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun. We're going to have to come up with some really creative ways to take care of kids and to take care of our staff. But I think in the long run, we want to be a district that people want to be in. Send their kids to, work in, everything. So I think that's where that's a part of this, is a long-term retention strategy.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I agree. And I think so much of it is an ask and an opportunity for us to demonstrate good leadership. Really to pay attention to what the community has said, to live up to the commitment to collaborate, and that takes time and relationship building. And I don't think that April provides that for any of us, and so I would be leaning toward November as well. And thank you to everybody. I appreciate all of the administrators at the district office. That must have been, and I'm sure continues to be, a gut-wrenching conversation. And I think the MEA reached out as well and shared their their counsel, and I think it's important for us to listen.
So if November, how many years would we go for? What's the consensus on that? We can go 1, 2, 3, 4. What do you guys think? If it was April, I would say 1.
Cabinet's recommendation is 4 years in November. Same dollar amounts.
Are we able to, if we went with November though, are we able to modify that? Like, are we able to put that conversation off until later, or to revisit it?
Well, you'll be passing a resolution at a later date. And at that time, you'll determine the dollar amounts.
So then at this time, basically the decision that's before the board after this conversation on our business item is the resolution to pass this for April. And we have to vote yay or nay on that then tonight.
That's the only decision before you tonight.
So a yay vote on that business item would mean we're going to pass it in April, or we're going to approve to have it put on the ballot for April. And then a nay vote would be no, we will not put it on the ballot for April. And then if we want to decide when the next time it will be put on a ballot, we'll in a later board meeting, we'll have that discussion and pass a separate resolution.
Yes, sir.
Just for clarity, thank you.
One thing I learned recently is that 7 people have responsibility for the financial integrity for the school: the board, the superintendent, and the CFO. So Brenda, what is your feeling on this? And just tell us what you think.
I was a very strong, let's go in April person. However, my goal is ultimately to pass a levy. And so in conversations and a personal reality check, because I'm overly optimistic, is that if we use part of that year we would have been asking for in April to build trust and to go out and ask again in November, that the results will be better for the district. And so if we passed in April, if we failed in April, we're guaranteeing ourselves a year of reduced revenue and reduction of programs. If we wait till November, it will be a short period of time, but I believe our chances are better in November once we take those few steps to engage our community.
You're a great CFO and an asset to the school district. And you get the headaches, you get the complexities of presenting this. So thank you for your work.
President Bumpus.
You know, I really want a communications room that I can go into, just like Kim did, and have this back and forth. I am a hopeful person, so I like to think we can do it. We can do it all. And it's really hard for me to grasp and wrap my head around because, you know, we volunteer to do really great things for kids, and here we are doing great things. I think I've, you know, spent a few hours doing things today alone. And so it hurts my heart to, after walking in schools and stuff, and like seeing all the good things that we do for kids. And and having the possibility of that not being an option is really sad. Sorry. So that's all that is. It's just sad, but I'm hopeful, and we'll go for November.
So if I make a motion, the recommended action that we, Monroe School District Board of Directors approve resolution. I propose that, and then we vote against it. Is that the approach, or should I make a motion that we not approve the resolution? Board, we just went through a class on this, so you tell me. It's kind of
Chuck, I
a,
don't think you can have a negative motion.
okay.
Yeah, you can either, you can only approve to pass a business item. And so we can make a motion to approve it. We can then second it. We have a discussion on it, and then we vote on it.
Okay.
We kind of already had the discussion, but because we scheduled that in the conversation, but you can't say I move that we don't do it. Yeah, Jeannie's right. We can't do that.
So who's going to make the motion? So they're going to be the black sheep on the board.
I'll be the black sheep. I got plenty coming my way anyway. So are we okay to move on then, Jen? I think you need to move us into business.
Yes, let's go ahead and move on to agenda item 3.01. Thank you for giving me a moment there. And let's see. So just the recommended action is that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve resolution number 3-2022. Is there a motion?
I move that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve resolution number 3-2022.
All in favor, raise your hand.
We need a second first, Jen.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? Okay, all in favor that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve resolution number 3-2022, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. 5, okay. The resolution is, I say denied.
Fails.
Is what?
Fails.
Fails. 0 to 5. Jenny, did you get that?
Yep, got it. All good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further agenda items, I am adjourning this meeting at 6:12 p.m. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.